Greetings, everyone. Once again, it's good to see lots of faces from all over the world attending this series of webinar. This is the fifth webinar we've had so far, and each and every webinar has been a great learning opportunity, at least for all of us. And right now, we're just about to start off with Dr. Anna. And of course, and I'm happy to see representation from Egypt, Portugal, Kampala, and so many other places. And just before we start off, a few details about the series of webinars that we are currently holding. I don't have my presentations with me, so I'll just talk through it based on what we've been doing for the last few months. This has been a 12-part webinar series that has been focusing more on the science of dissemination, and we've had four webinars so far, and this is the fifth webinar. And I'm going to share a link to where we have a list of more webinars that we are anticipating to have, and also webinars that we've already been able to have their recordings that have been made available on the ISSBD YouTube page that I'm also sharing on the chat. And I wouldn't want to take too much of Anna's time. Just a few details about Anne. Anna Catarina is an assistant professor at the Faculty of Psychology and Education Science of the University of Porto in Portugal, and her research focuses on developmental psychology, with most of her work evaluating parenting programs in real-world settings. And she's also an open science advocate. So you're going to learn more about her work based on what she's been doing in the field of open science. And at this point in time, I'm not sure whether Julie, you have any additional comments you may want to make before we could take it to Anna.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to welcome Anna and thank her on behalf of ISSBD and the Child and Family blog. We're so thrilled that you agreed to do this today, and I know there's a ton of excitement. A number of members have said that they couldn't make it today, but they're looking forward to receiving the recording afterwards. And so welcome and thank you for doing this.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here and have the opportunity to talk about open science, more discuss some of the issues on how we can look into the practices and incorporate them into our research. As Patrick told, I'm a psychologist. I teach at the University of Porto and I work in developmental psychology. My research focuses on parenting programs. But I really enjoy thinking about open sciences on these practices. How can they support us in our work and in situations like this to engage with each other and create a network and learn from each other and foster collaborations. So maybe I can share my presentation with you. Okay, so. Okay, so I think you are all seeing the presentation, right? Good. So this is what we'll briefly address today. Open science, but real impact. How do we get research to those who need it? This is a very interesting topic. For me, open science is something that I really enjoy working with and thinking about. Here at the Faculty of Psychology and Education Sciences at the University of Porto, in one of our research centers, the Center for Psychology at the University of Porto, we have an open science group, which is led by my colleague, Alessandra Souza. And this group that has been ongoing for 4 to 5 years now we have focused our efforts in disseminating knowledge on open science and have prepared different material, different resources that are available both in Portuguese and in English. So I think you will later have access to the presentation. Feel free to reach out, see our website and the resources we have prepared to learn more about our work on this topic. So here we have our agenda for today. I will briefly address the issue of open science, the purpose, the benefits, and describe the status of open developmental science. Then I will present the most common open science practices and how they integrate into the research workflow and try to stimulate reasoning and debate in the question and answers in the end on how they can be more or less appropriate for these different research methods. We will then look into scientific outreach and how open science can help us get our research out there to those who need it. And then we will have some time for discussion in the end, I hope. Okay, so getting to the topic that brings us here. What is this about open science? So open science is a movement in psychological science that started with the purpose of identifying problems that started with the purpose of supporting researchers and allow them to both identify problems in research and also debate possible solutions to overcome them. Very importantly, open science has the aim to increase transparency in our work and accountability in the research that we do. It has brought increased rigor to psychology research, contributing to a research that we want to be reproducible, meaning that we can recreate findings in the same data sets, but also replicable. We can do the things the same way and again, recreate the same findings in different data sets. Very importantly, one of the purposes that open science serves is that allows us to be alert and not engage with questionable research practices, such as, for instance, selective data reporting. Well, open science brings the promise to enhance research accessibility, transparency, and reproducibility while elevating the quality and value of research findings. It promotes the openness of research. We can use open science to show people our work and tell them how we are doing it. And by doing this, we make sure we are making science knowledge openly available, accessible, and reusable for everyone. And also, we are opening the process of scientific knowledge creation, evaluation, and communication to those people in community beyond the scientific community. Okay, so why does this matter? There are several well-known benefits to open science, including increased collaborations. If I share my work and people know what I'm doing, they will most likely reach out to me, and this will foster collaborations across academia, industry, and even the public sector, facilitating some intersectorial research practices. It is also more efficient because it allows to reduce the duplication of efforts and eliminate wasted resources. Another advantage of open science is the issue of visibility and impact, because studies with open data and in open science publication are viewed and cited more frequently. And also, researchers who adopt these practices often have increased career opportunities. This is particularly helpful for early career researchers to get their work out there. Another benefit is the increased public trust and engagement, because it opens science to society, making research more relevant to societal needs and bridging gaps. It brings more societal impact to our work, enables more evidence-based decision and policy making, and it maximizes the investment because it ensures that the research that receives public funding is openly available and that gets back the maximum benefit to society, the society who invested in us in our work. This is an image from the University of Cape Town that I quite like about why we should use open science and why we should engage with these practices. Again, as we see the benefit, we see the benefit of efficiency because we are reducing the duplication of efforts and increasing collaboration opportunities. Here on the right, we can see the issue of quality and integrity, which comes from transparency and gives opportunity for each one of us in our work to make corrections, self-corrections. We have the issue of innovation because making research data available and findings accessible early speed up the scientific discovery process and fosters innovation. We have economic benefits due to the optimization of resources. We don't have to waste months or weeks working on something if someone has developed that material and makes it available for us to use. And finally, we have public disclosure and engagement that allows us to promote a greater awareness of science among citizens and global benefits. Open science practices benefit the solution of global challenges for many reasons, but mostly through collaborations. Okay, so if we know that open science is so relevant, what's the status for the type of research that we do? When we focus on developmental science, we can see that some studies suggest that different subfields present rates of open science, of using open science practices in different degrees. So developmental research seems not to incorporate open science practices to the same degrees as other subfields of psychological science. And why could that be? One of the issues that is often raised about this is that this might happen due to specific issues of this area of studies. We struggle to recruit participants, we often deal with sensitive data, and these aspects may affect the methodological and analytical choices that we do in our research work and are often also noted as barriers to the use of open science practices. However, I think there's very big agreement on this, that developmental sciences can benefit from embracing open science practices for many reasons. But one of the most important ones is to keep up with the latest developments in the methods and in psychological research. Okay, so moving on to our second topic of today, which are the open science practices. What are these? So, open science practices are the ways through which we implement open science. And as you can see here in this image from the open science framework, there are several practices that we can implement throughout the different stages of our research workflow. The open science framework is a platform that was designed and is available for people to use and facilitate the integration of open science practices throughout the entire research workflow. I usually use this platform, but there are several other options available, such as Zenodo and others. And I think you can check with your research team which could be the best option for you if you're not using it yet. But as you can see here, we have a lot of open science practices that fit into the different stages of the research workflow that go from participatory research to open access, correction, and synthesis, depending if we are more in an early stage of our work or more in a later stage of our work. But the issue is not using open science practice, is knowing where we should begin. So most people who are new to open science just don't know where to start. And to that, we want to highlight that open science is not an all or nothing approach, but rather a flexible, gradual process. We should take small steps, start where we are, and decide on which practice would be easier to incorporate in the stage of research that we are at. Once we start integrating these practices into our research workflow, we naturally add more as the work progresses. But when we need to start, we should think about starting small, like baby steps. There are plenty of open science practices that we can choose from according to the stage of our research work, but also the time, the resources, the knowledge, and the expertise that we have. As you can see here, you have an image of a research workflow that starts with the lighter blue when we think about an idea, discover the idea, and then do the study until we write a report and publish the report. As we have seen in the previous image, there are plenty of open science practices that we can add to each one of these stages. But here, for the focus of this webinar, I will focus on 4, which are the most common. So one of the most common is having our work available through open access, which is also one of the open science practices you have heard about and are probably more familiar with. And other 3 are open data, open materials, and pre-registration. These 3 practices are also open science badges, available as open science badges through the Center for Open Science as incentives for researchers to share data, materials, or pre-register their work. There are currently several journals that award these badges to signal when researchers have made data available, materials available, or pre-registered their work before publication. And why are these meaningful? How do we apply them to the research workflow? If we don't think about open science practices and we look into our work, what we know in terms of access is that our research plan, the materials that we prepare, our data and our analysis, and finally our publication are only available for those who are actively involved in developing the work. So these are available for the authors, but not for the public at large. Other researchers indeed might have access to the final publication, to the paper, if the databases where the journal where the paper was published is available through their universities, or they will have to pay a fee to have access to the paper. Well, if we incorporate open science practices into our work and we pre-register our work, if we make our materials available, if we provide open data when we publish our papers. And if we have our work in open access, then the access will not be only available for the authors, but also to other researchers and to the public at large. So this is a very big benefit, because I can benefit from something that Patrick is doing elsewhere in a different research team and in a different setting, but it might be meaningful for my work. And I can cite Patrick's work and use the resources they have developed there. Okay, so we will now look into each one of these 4 specific practices and see what they are and what's their relevance before we discuss this topic further. So about open access. Open access is about sharing online and free of charge our scientific papers without any technical obstacles, such as a mandatory registration to a given website. And we can make our work available in open access through multiple ways. First, through preprints. A preprint is when we make our manuscript available on a public server prior to its publication, meaning this is before the paper being peer-reviewed. When a preprint is made available, it receives a digital object identifier, a DOI, and therefore can be cited, and people know about our work. Once the paper is published, we can also make it available in a public server, such as the ones that we have at the universities we work at, or our personal websites, through a self-archiving, which is the postprint meaning. And we can make the self-archive of the accepted version of the article. Usually we have to go through the journal guidelines in terms of publication and the agreement we sign to the publication to see what are the rules that each publisher establishes in terms of postprint. But this is also a good way to get our work out there and make it available. And finally, we have the open access. Open access is the publisher's version of the article with the layout and the fancy design that the journals have our papers published. And this is accessible with no restrictions, but often requires the payment of an article processing charge to make sure it's widely available and anyone can download it. So why is this important? Are there any advantages for this? Yes, there are. As you can see here in this graph, in our field, well, in all fields, I would say this is something similar across all disciplines, but in the area of psychology, which is here highlighted in this pink rectangle, you can see that articles in open access receive more citations compared to those in the left part of the graph that are not in open access. Okay, moving forward and talking about open materials. Open materials are the practice of making publicly available the components of the research methods that are needed to reproduce the work reported, the procedure and the analysis of our research. And why is this relevant? For many reasons. First, to ensure reproducibility of our work. We can reproduce other researchers' work if we have access to their documentation of their methodology, and even to the documentation of the analysis pipeline that they incorporated into their work. This decreases the costs of the implementation for other groups because I have to spend less time, less money doing the work if it had been already developed. There is also a greater potential for error correction. We should look into open science as a shared responsibility in a way that if I spot an error, if someone spots an error in my work, they can let me know, I can revise, and I can do the things as they should be again. Again, it increases the impact of our work because this is also something that counts as an output of our work and therefore can have citations and increased citations. Yeah, and that's it. So now that we know what are open materials, here we have some examples. We can have, we can make available the materials that we create in our research, such as questionnaires, interview protocols, cognitive tests, instructions, educational resources. There are several examples that are not here included, but might also be appropriate. But what we really need to think about this is more than what we want to share, we also need to look into what is relevant that we share, because we can only share the things that were developed by us. So we really need to look into copyright and proprietary rights before we share any of these works. If we do decide to share, for instance, an interview protocol, then we should add documentation to our material so that people know how it all works and how they can use it. And we can also include citations in our work about the resources that we created and are openly available, because this is also meaningful to our research, and again, especially important for early career researchers. And what about open data? Open data are the practice of sharing data that can be freely accessed, reused, remixed, and redistributed for academic research and teaching purposes and other different purposes. Ideally, this data should not have restrictions on reuse or redistribution and should be appropriately licensed as such. It is important that we have this data curated and anonymous so that it can be used without compromising the information of the participants who contribute to these data sets. Specifically, if we are talking about sensitive data. But why is it important that we have open data available? So shared data are reusable and therefore they increase science efficiency. They allow us to answer new questions that had not been foreseen in the prior studies where that data was used. They are useful for meta-analysis and also for aggregation studies when we pull data from different data sets and therefore can create larger sample sizes with increased statistical power. This information is available in a permanent archive, which means it's easy to find and easy to transfer. There's, again, increased potential for error correction, shared responsibility. And this has been an increasing demand for journals and also funding agencies. And it's also a way to provide higher impact in our work because we get more citations again with this. So the final practice we will look into today is the pre-registration. Pre-registration is the practice of archiving a timestamp, public and immutable plan of a study's hypothesis, methods, and analysis plans. Think about pre-registration as timestamping your idea so that and what you want to do in your research. And when should we do it? Well, if we look into the research workflow, where we have our research idea and develop the idea and then do the study design, we should do the pre-registration before we collect and analyze data. ideally before data collection, and definitely before data analysis. And then we write a report, and then the report is peer-reviewed, and the reviewers have the opportunity to see that we were transparent about our work, and we did not engage with questionable research practices or lack of integrity in what we do before we publish our work. And specifically, what does pre-registration includes? Well, the objectives and the hypothesis, and of course, some theoretical background that supports the idea that is here being presented, and then information on the method, the size and nature of the sample of participants we want to work with, the data collection procedure we foresee, how we will collect the data, what measures will we use, how will we treat the data? Will there be rules for data exclusion? How will we do the quality check of our data? And what's the plan for the data analysis? What are the inferences that we will establish? This is very important because this prevents questionable research practices such as p-hacking or harking that I'm sure you're familiar with. But the question is, how should we do it? And again, the answer is take baby steps. Start with registering the idea and a simple plan for the methods, and work in it before you make it publicly available through the pre-registration. If you want to look more into this, the Open Science platform has a set of resources, including literature, instructions, and frequently asked questions that are also available. And also there are different templates in case you want to do a review, a systematic review, or a scoping review, or an RCT, or an economic evaluation of something. You have different templates available in the website that you can look into with specific guidelines. The pre-registration has the purpose of increasing transparency. However, there's a limitation to it, which is we do it the best that we know with the resources that we have available, but this is not peer-reviewed. If you want your study protocol to be peer-reviewed, then you can engage with different practices, such as having a registered report. And this is something that has been increasingly adopted by scientific journals. The difference between a pre-registration and a scientific and a registered report is that in a first stage, you prepare your study protocol and you submit it to the journal. And this includes the background, the hypothesis, and your research plan. And this will receive feedback from reviewers. If it is accepted, it receives a decision of in-principle acceptance, which means that it is published as a study protocol, and the authors must collect the data and do the analysis and complete the report in a given timeline. And this is something that has been growing in the field of developmental science. So if you want to consider this option, there are plenty of journals you can choose from also. Okay, so moving on with the presentation, and I'm really sorry we are not in person because I would really like to interact with you and ask you some of the questions I have for you in person and see your answers and reactions to it. So maybe we can engage in this discussion in the end of the session. So we have seen the four most common open science practices, and specifically the three ones that have the badges attributed. But the truth is that in our work, we use different research methods. We can use quantitative data analysis. We can follow quantitative research, qualitative research, or mixed methods research. As in other research fields, in developmental science, a pluralistic approach for research methods also apply. And what does this mean? That we can use different research methods or designs as long as they are appropriate for answering the evaluation question posed in our study, and these are rigorously conducted. So if we can do our work with different methods, and we have different open science practices, my question for you is, are open science practices equally suitable across all research methods? Is it mandatory that we use all of them, or are these the standards for quality in our work? So the open science practices came as an answer to the reproducibility crisis when we wanted to promote transparency and accountability in our work. These practices are widespread and well-known. They are part of journal and society policies, labs, research groups, and even higher education programs. However, these most common practices, as the ones we have seen today, stem from quantitative research methods and may not be the best to incorporate in other methodological approaches. While different research methods can share the same foundational open science practices, we should not take them as an universal measure of quality. For instance, pre-registration or open data may be inappropriate for some studies. Imagine studies where you collect qualitative data, where you look into the lived experiences of the participants, and there's plenty of sensitive data. We just cannot share that data at all. So for these reasons, the application of open science practices must be tailored to the specific methods that we work with. And we should know for sure that a one-size-fits-all approach is often unsuitable across all fields and methods of research that we can employ in our work. Well, indeed, there's a very interesting article by Paunel, where the author says that for open research to be truly transformative, it must embrace methodological pluralism, learn from qualitative traditions, and accommodate all research approaches. And also that moving forward, open science can be expanded by applying the principles of qualitative research, such as incorporating reflexivity and participatory knowledge production to promote a culture of research that is flexible, collaborative, and also equitable. Okay, so we are getting to our final topic, and which is about science outreach. Science outreach is about sharing developmental research findings with the community, fostering public trust, and promoting evidence-based decision and policymaking. We want our work to impact the lives of the people we work with and the communities where we develop our research. And these include initiatives to bridge the gap between academic research and real-world everyday practice. We want to improve the quality of life of people and the work developed by the practitioners who work with them. But how do we do this effectively? How do we comply with the UNESCO recommendations to do science outreach activities in a meaningful and effective way, ensuring equitable, fair, and reciprocal access to science and all producers and consumers of knowledge? One way we can get to this is through open engagement of societal actors. Through a landscape of approaches and practices that involve stakeholders across society to participate in one or more steps of the scientific research process. And one way we can achieve this is through citizen science, and which involves many forms of collaboration with members of the public in knowledge co-creation and application. There are examples such as community-based participatory research, community science, citizen observatories, among others. Vane and colleagues present 4 key recommendations for opening science to society, with the first being promoting an open understanding of opening science to society by empowering and engaging societal actors through open engagement with science, while ensuring diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in these practices, by promoting capacity building in opening science to society at different levels, national and policymaker levels, institutional and individual levels, and also providing knowledge exchange opportunities, by preparing infrastructures and services that effectively open science to society, and of course, having funding to be able to implement these practices. But engaging science with societal actors also requires an open dialogue and engagement with other knowledge systems, such as digital and technological systems. In a recent work by Oliveira and colleagues, they propose a framework combining open science and communication science. Because if open science encourages public access to scientific material and communication science enables public understanding of scientific knowledge, we know that the combination of both intersects to improve transparency, accessibility, and public trust in research and the work we do. And how can we do this? We know there are several guidelines and recommendations and best practices available, but we also need to see how we can incorporate them and tailor them to the research we are working on. So before we end today's presentation, I want to share with you a brief example of the work we have been doing at the Faculty of Psychology at the University of Porto, and how we engaged with societal actors and provided them with, involved them in the research and also provided them with feedback. So in my research group, together with my colleagues Arlanda Cruz and Rita Pinto, we have developed a line of research on the evaluation of parenting programs to support families in community-based services. In our project, we are doing a quasi-experimental trial to evaluate the outcomes, implementation, and cost-effectiveness of an individual format parenting program delivered in real-world settings in family support services. We aimed for a project with societal impact at many levels, with one example being that a substantial part of the funding we receive goes to train practitioners in the communities, the professionals who actually work with families in their everyday practice. So we had family support practitioners become accredited providers, and we encourage them to implement the program as a tool in their everyday work, in their everyday practice. We started the program implementation back in 2020, just before the pandemic hit, and the program implementation is still currently ongoing. We are now in our third round of funding, and we have had the opportunity to continue this project throughout the time. But we soon noticed that some practitioners were not using the program and they were not engaging with this intervention. So we decided to evaluate whether these practitioners sustained or not the use of the program after time and what factors influenced it, and explore the perspectives not only of the practitioners, but also of the organizational managers in their institutions and the system level representatives that supported them in their work and practice. To do so, we engaged with different stakeholders that were present, that we present here in a multi-tier system of influence to decision maker. So we had the family support professionals at the practice level, then we have the institutions, representatives and organizational managers at the organizational level, and then we had representatives of the national coordination bodies at the system level. And these were people from the National Child Protective Services, Social Security, and the National Network of Family Support Centers. And we worked with them, we did interviews, and then we analyzed the data through thematic analysis, but also through a SWOT analysis. And I will not focus on the details. I will not focus in the details results, but we found that only about one third of the practitioners continued using the program 5 years after the training. And we concluded that there was a need to strengthen the support for implementation and supervision, specifically in the period right after the training of the professionals. And I wanted to share this experience with you because this is a very simple example of how we can engage with social actors. And in terms of outputs, we had one paper published reporting this work, and this was published last year, but we also did an infographic with the key findings on the facilitators and barriers to the sustained use of parenting programs to support families at risk in real-world settings that is available as open material. And we presented this to the stakeholders involved and believe that this is something that helps them in the decision-making about the routine care practice delivered to the families they support daily in the services they work at. Okay, and now just some final thoughts to wrap up the presentation for today. So it's really true that open science practices promote transparency and accountability in research, but we should not look at open science practices as something that is all or nothing. Instead, we should really look into this as a flexible, gradual process. We start with the practices that are easier to incorporate into our research workflow and just move from there in our work. And also, as we know more about the open science practices and we reason more about how we integrate them into the research we do, we must be aware that some practices may be more suitable for some areas of research or some research methods. And therefore, it's very important that we take a pluralistic approach and try to accommodate all research methods and see what's the best fit for the work that we are currently doing and ongoing. And finally, it's very important that we continue the debate on how to improve engagement and communication, open communication with these societal actors that are so important for our work to support development, to support families, to support child development, and to do research that is aligned with the Sustainable Developmental Goals proposed by the UN. So, well, thank you for hearing me, and thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And I think we will now have time for some questions and answers. And I also think you will receive this presentation and you will see here the contacts. And please feel free to reach out and just let me know your thoughts and comments. And I really look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Oh yeah, we have the references for the work here presented. Thank you.
That was fantastic. That was probably the most clear, discussion about open science practices that I've heard. So that was really, really wonderful. We do have time for a couple of questions. I haven't seen any yet in the chat, but does anybody want to ask any questions? I certainly can get us started, but I want to allow all of you to ask the questions too.
Julie, mine is not a question. I'm just a comment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anna, you concluded by saying that we should gradually, it's not a one or nothing. So gradually just pick the practices that are acceptable or that you can work with in your research. But also that one is something we need to balance with the requirements of the funder. Maybe the funder just wants you to have all what you're planning in pre-registered, for example. I don't know, do you have any suggestions of how to go about this? Because some of it, we talk about, you rightfully talked about the data, qualitative data. Sometimes it's very identifiable as much as you try to identify it. So do you have any suggestions on how to go about this?
Thank you so much for this question. This is a very, very interesting question. The funding agencies, more and more, so they want us to be transparent about our work, and especially if the work is, the funds are public, the funds that are used to support our research, if they are public, the funding agency will want us to engage with open science practices. And the example you presented is a great example for the reasons why we really have to think about and consider what are the best practices that we can incorporate into the research workflow. Of course, if you are doing qualitative research, it's very difficult to have data to make available. It's probably sensitive data, so you wouldn't want to have that data available, but you can choose other options. You can choose maybe not doing a pre-registration, which would be more appropriate for a confirmatory rather than an exploratory study. But you can think about a detailed management data plan where you decide on how you will anonymize the data, how you will deal with sensitive data, and just describe the pipeline of work you want to do with this qualitative data. And that is also a very relevant open science practice. And then you can consider, if you are doing this data management plan, you can also think about having your work available in open access once you have the final report out there and how you can do it. So there are several options, and we really must think which are the best according to the type of research and the methods we are applying in our work. Yeah.
I think there's two questions in the chat. Federico, I see you right there. If you want to ask your question, and then hopefully we'll have time to get to Siti, who also has a question about like her qualitative data. But Federico, you go first, and then we'll get to Siti.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Well, this is a great topic. We are discussing these things in our lab right now, so it's great to be here and hear all this. So I was wondering for you, what are the main challenges or maybe advantages for implementing this kind of goals or practices in developmental science?
Thank you, Federico. It's happy to hear. This is very timely for you in terms of the discussions you're having in your group. I don't think I have. I don't think I have an answer for you. I can see there are many opportunities. I can see there are also plenty of challenges. I would say that for sure, we know there are other subfields in the psychological research area that embrace and use more open science practices. We can think about social psychology, for instance, that has a lot of work in this field. For developmental science, I see that the challenges, at least for us, for our research group, some of the challenges we work with is the fact that we deal with a lot of sensitive data, such as data from children and families who are engaged with child protection services, and it's something we need to consider always very carefully when and how we do share their data or other processes. We have been gradually implementing these practices for, I would say that my colleagues are here, they can help me with this, for at least 5 years now. And we have been doing that in very different ways. So, of course, we have pre-registered, especially the RCTs we do and the systematic and scoping reviews we do. And that's the easy part of the pre-registration, because that's the gold standard for the good practices when we do that type of work. But we have also shared data. We have shared data that we specifically curate for the purpose of the publication. So when we have a paper, we prepare the data set so that it's completely anonymous and completely curated, so that only includes the variables in the data set that are meaningful to replicate the analysis that we describe in the paper, and we make that available. Of course, I should note that we have an approval, not only from the ethics committee, but also from the data protection unit, and the participants give their consent for us to share their data. And we are based in Europe, in Portugal. So we are part of the transformative agreement from different publishing houses and databases. I'm not sure if this is the way we should say it in English, but we also get because of this publishing agreement, we have several of our papers available in open access. So I think so. Just to sum up, and I think I'm not. I think I'm answering to the opportunities in the implementation of open science practices in developmental science, and I'm trying to think about this, about the way we have been doing this. I think it depends, but I really think that a gradual approach, it's the best way to start doing it. And yeah, if you have papers you can get to in that you can make available through open access, that's a good way to start. And then you just go from there. Because often we need to think of it's when we are developing the ideas and preparing the research work plan that we have to consider how we will use open science practices. And that's also a good way to start if you are preparing new research ideas at the same time you are working in the ones you are developing. So, yeah.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
So we're already past our time, and I don't want to keep people longer. Anna, would it be okay with you if like CT and a couple other people who had comments like send you an email with their questions?
No worries. I would be very happy to hear from whoever, anyone who has questions, and yeah.
Wonderful.
And
It's
stay
such
in touch.
a timely topic that I think's like on the, minds of scholars around the world. And so I think like you're going to get a whole bunch of emails. But thank you for agreeing to do that and for giving this talk. This has been, really wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you everybody for attending. I will send out emails.
Me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will send out emails about the next webinar, which will be in March. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.